Do you think organic food is a scam? Hi, I'm Farmer Dan here, and today I want to talk a little bit about organic farming and whether or not it's a scam or worth the extra money. See what your thoughts are. I've been a part of the organic movement now for, probably about 25 years. It's kind of the new term is more regenerative farming, but I'm beginning to hear a lot of negative comments from people in society. It seems like somebody is promoting the idea, even doctors and things must be promoting or expressing that organic farming is a scam and it's not worth the extra money. I took my boys on a guided tour using a Can-Am side by side ATVs and went through the trails on 1,100 acres down in Arkansas. And about halfway through, we stopped on top of the bluff and was just looking and admiring the view. And somehow food got brought up, and a gentleman on the tour mentioned that he believed organic was a scam. Well, being an organic farmer, although not certified organic, I had to chime in and just express that I was a part of that industry and it's far from a scam. However, I did throw in, and because he mentioned USDA Organic, which I have to admit, anytime that you get the government involved, it really looks out for big ag, and they dummy down the certification to fit big ag, so it's easier for big ag to become certified. And one thing I've learned in this industry is the FDA or USDA Organic, whatever the case may be, they change definitions. So technically they're lying, but technically they're not. To give you an example, I used to raise meat chickens in my 20s, and me and my family would butcher fresh chickens every week and sell them in the St. Louis market at the farmers market. And then we also worked with a lot of five-star, high-end restaurants that were looking for a higher quality product for their menu. And because we processed and butchered chickens, fresh chickens weekly, I knew what a fresh chicken looked like. But then I would go to these grocery stores and they would say fresh chicken on it, in their coolers, packed on ice or what have you, the grocery store that has their fresh meat counter. And they would say fresh chicken on there. Well, I know what a chicken that has been frozen and thawed looks like. And I certainly knew what a fresh chicken looked like because I was doing that and I knew they were fresh. So I sat there and said, how in the world can they call those things fresh? Because I know it's been frozen. Well, come to find out, the FDA changed the definition of what frozen was, and they said that anything that's 10 degrees, as long as it doesn't go under 10 degrees, it can still be classified as fresh. Well, anything between 10 and 32 is still frozen in my book. But that's how they work it to make people think that they're buying fresh when in fact they're buying frozen. And I get it. These, chickens are coming from who knows where. They can't possibly be fresh. They have to freeze them in order to keep them from spoiling before they sell them. So I get that, but don't sit there and call it fresh. Whereas me being 2 hours from St. Louis, I could bring in fresh chicken because I was butchering it weekly and it was getting consumed within that week. So that just gives you an example of kind of how things can change and why I don't really trust USDA Organic. They can change things that, and use different wordings that make you think one way when in fact that's not the case at all, because they've changed the definition of whatever that may be. But I had to chime in, and so I did. I did acknowledge that USDA Organic can be somewhat of a scam. However, if I have a choice between a conventional product and the USDA Organic product, I'm still going to go for the USDA Organic product, believing that it is somewhat better. A lot of people feel that organic is just price gouging. Well, I know for a fact that, it takes a lot more care. You can't do things the same way, right? Uh, the way conventional chickens or beef is raised is really unhealthy for the animal, and so they have to use antibiotics and different things to keep the animals healthy. Whereas being organic, we don't have those options. Certainly not on a routine basis. My first choice is still to support the local farmer, and this is what I would say: if you have the option to, which I believe everybody does, you have the option to buy from a local farm, then it's not a scam, because you can go out and walk their farm and see their livestock and their animals and see how things are being done and raised, and see how happy and content the animals are, and how comfortable they are, and see for yourself. But it is a higher price because it's a lot more labor intensive. For me, and again, we're not certified organic, but we use organic practices, and it takes a lot more work. It's easy to just shoot an animal up with an antibiotic and call it a day. But when you try to treat disease naturally, first off, you've got to start off early. The sooner you can get to it, the better. Obviously, I'm a big fan and advocate of preventative medicine. So, using things to help keep the animals healthy, via the environments that they're in and conditions they're living in, the quality of the feed, minerals, free choice minerals, salt blocks, things like that can certainly help and go a long ways when it comes to preventing disease. But when it comes to treating an animal, it can take a lot longer. But I'm also not a purist where I will never use antibiotics. I believe that antibiotics can be a useful tool, and it's not being a good steward of raising livestock and letting them suffer or die when perhaps an antibiotic will do the job. But it's not our go-to. It's not my first thing I grab unless it's a really severe case. If we're dealing with a really high fever or things like that, we need to get ahead of it quickly. But again, that's about being a good steward with what God's entrusted to us. But I believe antibiotics are a lot more effective on my farm because it's not a routine use. Because a lot of antibiotics these days are ineffective on certain things because these bacteria have built up resistance over the years from overuse. But because we seldom use them, they're generally effective on our farm. So do I think organic is a scam? No, I don't. Do I think USDA organic can be deceptive? Yes, I do. But that's why, again, I go back to, get connected with local farms. I truly believe the future of America is back to small family farms, supporting your local economy. People say a lot of times to me that they just can't afford it. Well, I disagree with that. I think, and I know everybody's finances are different, but we all have money for what's a priority. And maybe it's just a time to realign what your priorities are. People, I think, have a hard time connecting their health with the food that they eat. But if I sat there and could promise you that if you ate organic or from local farms, that you would be disease free, I think everybody would sign up. Obviously, I can't guarantee that. Nobody can. And there's certainly a lot of other issues that we deal with, the air we breathe, the water we drink, and things like that that can cause sickness and health issues. I've mentioned it before, the EMF radiation, and of course, all the toxins in our water, drinking bottled water or consuming beverages other than water and think that we're getting hydrated. That's topics I've covered in other videos and will continue to talk about. But it's important to back to what we were talking about. It's I can't obviously guarantee somebody's not going to get sick or get a disease if they eat organic, but you know I think there's a huge disconnect with thinking that it just doesn't matter. And I also think that we've gotten away from and I've seen videos of nutritionists even advocating junk food because it's cheap food and you get a lot of calories. Well, yeah, well, that's where you're going to get your health issues from is eating a lot of processed foods, a lot of processed sugars. These foods and drinks are just loaded with sugars and chemicals and things like that. And well, yeah, like it's high calorie, but if if people would understand that there's a direct correlation between those processed foods and your overall health, I think people would change. And they're really empty calories because your body's not getting the nutrients it needs. I think, the processed foods, have been shown to um, have chemicals added to it to make it addictive. In fact, the cigarette companies discovered that they could get people addicted to cigarettes by adding chemicals to the cigarettes, but then realized that not everybody's going to smoke, but everybody eats. And so they started buying food companies and putting these additives and chemicals in the processed foods to get people addicted to food. Again, that's where, I believe the scripture, when it talks about the love of money is the root of all evil, it's not evil in the sense of, um, the wickedness or doing evil things, but it means all kinds of evil. The root is money, and that's where what we see with these food companies is it's all about money and profits, but it's at the expense of our health. But I think when people say they can't afford it, if they could make that connection to the food that they're eating and understand that the cleaner your source, the healthier you're going to be. There's a saying that I like to say, and I didn't come up with it, but I use it. Either you're going to give it to the farm or the pharmacy. And that's really the truth. People don't see that though. And if we could help educate people and help them understand that, perhaps things would be different. But that is the reality. So what are your thoughts? You think organic is a scam? You think it's worth the extra money? You think it's worth supporting and paying more for local farms to exist? Again, I think the future of America is in small family farms, partly because, I think it's important to keep our money in the local economy. I think there's a point where perhaps even shipping produce and food cross country or from overseas is perhaps a thing of the past, or we'll get to the something of the past. And so we'll really have to rely on the local farm to supply our needs and our food, which really goes back to kind of another point that I've learned over the years is, our ancestors used to eat what was in season, but we've come accustomed to eating fresh fruit all year round rather than recognizing or just eating what is in season in your region. Yes, you can and freeze some for the off season, but we've gotten so used to being able to get fresh fruit year round. And perhaps that's not really the way that God designed our bodies. And, I was told that like my grandparents or great grandparents, in the spring, they would, eat dandelion leaves or dandelion root, which is a great liver detox and helps detox, all the toxins and things out of your body. And, from, kind of not perhaps having those fresh fruits and things in the off season. And so they detox to get ready for the next season of eating fresh fruit and what's in season. But, that's it's kind of another thought as well. But anyway, I think that's good for now, but I'd love to hear what your thoughts are and whether or not you think organic or supporting local farms is worth it, or if you think it's a scam. So let's open up some friendly conversations and let's have some discussion. But for now, this is Farmer Dan signing off.